Books the Biz, a podcast that looks at both the financial and operational sides of success. Please welcome our hosts, Dan Paulson and Richard Veltre. Dan is the CEO of Envision Development International, and he works with leaders to increase sales and profits through great cultures with solid operations. Rich is CEO of the Veltre Group and a financial strategist working with companies to manage their money more effectively. Now on to the podcast.
Good morning and welcome to Books the Biz. We are here. I am back with my good friend Rich Veltre. Rich, how are you doing today?
I'm doing well, Dan. How are you?
Excellent. Couldn't be better. If I was any better, I'd be you. Hey, when we were talking at the last on the last podcast, we kind of came up with our subject for this podcast. So to fill our listeners in case you missed that part of it, I've seen this posted a number of times, but we were kind of rolling into inflation when we were talking last week. Somebody had posted about how they had an 18% mortgage back in like the late 70s, early 80s, and they can't understand why people are so riled up about, the fact that mortgages are right now at 6 or 7%.
Yeah.
And I'm like, well, there's truth to that. I don't know. I think we're both young enough to remember it, but not old enough to have participated in it. But I do know that there was a time when you bought a mortgage and it was an 18% interest rate, and basically you paid your interest. It was like an interest only loan. Yeah. The idea was that you were going to make up for it on appreciated value of your asset. And that's where you were going to get out from underneath the big rock that they planted you under. Don't know how well that worked. That was like almost subprime stuff, but that was dealing with it back in the 70s and 80s. Yeah. We're nowhere near that now, which is good.
Yeah.
But there's a lot of other issues going on. And I think if you looked at just home prices, that would be one thing. But you look at home prices, you look at grocery, you look at gas, you look at utilities, all these other expenses have shot up dramatically. And I think it's worth talking about that because that affects businesses directly. It's either going to affect their profitability because now they might be paying more in cost of goods sold. They're definitely paying more in labor because, of course, during the 2020s, we saw labor spike to try and keep up with inflation and also to get bodies in the door, because if the next guy was going to pay $20 an hour, maybe you had to pay 22 or 23 to get that person in your door. So it's not like inflation goes away. But, it is an election year, isn't it, Rich? Last I checked, I get a commercial about every 30 seconds telling me it's an election year and telling me who to vote for. Yeah. Well, campaigners like making campaign promises. And, of course, with inflation right now, one of the biggest there's two big ones. One, both candidates have jumped on, which is no tax on tips. Maybe we can talk about that a little bit later. But probably the bigger one is price gouging. And apparently, price gouging is a relatively new thing. It's just happened in the last couple of years. Not so sure that's the case.
I don't think so.
I mean, we look at the numbers a different way, and it's kind of hard to say what's price gouging. Now, I will say, in all honesty, price gouging does exist to a certain extent, but the market takes care of itself. Because if you feel like you're getting gouged on prices, what happens?
You go somewhere else.
You don't buy it. It takes care of itself. And eventually those prices come back down. Well, our illustrious political leaders feel the need to swoop in and save the day, and that could lead to further business problems in and of itself. So, Rich, you're the finance guy. I'm going to turn it over to you. Talk to me about price gouging like I'm a 5-year-old. Explain it to me.
I think we just kind of did. I mean, basically, it's funny, though, when people sit there and they say, okay, prices have gone up, inflation, and they talk about the fact that, everything's costing me more. The fact of the matter is, some of those things will just stay there. Right. Inflation to me says, yes, as you mentioned, cost of goods sold is up, labor's up. Okay. But they're not going to come back down. Okay. They're going to hit a high and people are going to say, this is the new normal.
Yep.
Right. And then when it becomes the new normal, then everybody has to adjust. Okay. So what's the true inflation? The true inflation is the fact that some costs are higher because it goes back to supply and demand. You know, you want that, set of two by fours, and you find out that, that two by four is now more expensive. Why? Because it was harder to get. So that to me is the, inflation factor. That to me is the reason why things are costing more. And those things may actually come back down. But like you said, the examples you gave, other things that are in cost of goods sold, including labor, I think we are looking at the new normal. I think the inflation rates are what they are. The inflation that's happened is going to stay. And, even back to the, the home prices and the prices of the mortgage, the interest rates,
Mm-hmm.
I think they're gonna stay up. I don't think they're gonna go back to that, 3, 4, 5% rate that everybody had. I don't see it. I see it being, okay, this is again new normal, and get used to it and adjust to it, just like they did back in the in the 70s and 80s that we mentioned.
Yeah, I agree with you. I think housing prices are now at a new standard that they weren't just a couple of years ago. It's hard to say with interest rates, though, because the only lever that our government seems to have to pull is interest rates. So if the economy appears like it's slowing down, they lower interest rates down. The economy's going up, then they raise interest rates to try and manage that growth, so it
Yeah.
doesn't go too crazy. And uh, every economist I've heard from has pretty much said, that it's really kind of like you have a hammer and everything's a nail. So that's really the only thing they got is they've got a hammer, and they use it liberally sometimes.
Yeah.
I pulled up an article here, so if you're listening to this, you're not going to see it, but it was on Investopedia as why is the consumer price index controversial? And consumer price index is what the government really kind of bases inflation on. And what I was trying to figure out, and again, maybe you can help me with this, is they've changed how they measure inflation over the years. We go back to again the 70s and 80s. We saw very high inflation numbers, and even a couple years ago when we saw it spike, they were saying, well, it's only it was 18% in the 70s. It's only 9% now. Well, 9% is still bad, but why? I mean, most people I think would say it feels just as bad if they lived through both times. Do you know what they changed? Do you know how they changed recording it?
I don't know the specific pieces that they've changed, but they're always changing. This actually is what we were talking about in the last podcast, that spiked the how, we should probably talk more about that. And the fact of the matter is, when they don't like the answer, they seem to want to change the formula. Um, but everybody always seems to have a really good idea, like a good reason why they would want to change it. But to me, it just, the biggest thing is you have to give people consistent calculations so they can tell that, you know, that something's different. So they can tell that, yes, as you said, 18% versus 9%. But if you change the formula, it's not 18 versus 9, it's 18 versus whatever 9 should have been. Um,
Yep.
so it gets difficult to try to kind of weed through the junk that gets thrown in front of you. You know, I live in the world of accounting, and we've lived in the world of accounting, and consistency and comparability are two major pieces to why accounting is what it is. You want to be able to compare 2023 to 2022 and know what changed. And if you don't calculate it the same way, there's all kinds of rules out there for how you have to disclose the fact that you changed it. So I don't understand why it's okay in the news media, in the government, to just say, well, we're just going to change it and then everybody's just going to have to live with it.
Well, I don't even think they tell us that they change it. They just kind of
Yeah, they
change
just
it,
do.
and then it's like, well, look, the numbers are so much better, and
Yeah.
it kind of comes to the point. Well, you give me data, and I will figure out how to manipulate that data to be in favor of what my opinion is, and that's pretty much what's going on here, isn't it?
Yeah. So it's no different than when we talked about unemployment rates. It's like, how do you know that the unemployment rate is better now than it was a year ago when you changed why you or how you came up with the number? So I'm not comparing apples to apples. I'm comparing apples to oranges. So, an apple's not an orange and never will be. So at that point, I've got a whole new trend because I have no history because you've calculated it a different way. I mean, I don't know what else to tell on that because it drives me crazy. It
I think
really
it
does.
drives all of us crazy.
Yeah.
As a business owner, to me, the challenge of all this is try to figure out what's next.
Hmm.
So again, as of this recording, we're in an election year. We're trying to gauge our clients' resiliency, if you will,
Yeah.
to continue making purchases, to continue growing. We work with a number of different companies in a number of different industries, and all of them are at different peaks and valleys.
Yep.
I did a recent survey, and most of my clients tend to be manufacturing and construction. And one of the questions was, are you doing as well? Are you doing better? Or are you doing worse than you were the previous year? And a vast majority said they were actually up. Now, I didn't ask the question, are we up because inflation created higher numbers? So again, if you compare year to year, sales have increased, but are we then looking at cost of goods sold and everything else? And I'm guessing, across the board, they're feeling more confident with it. But then you go to the consumer side, and we're starting to see the early inklings that maybe things aren't as good as some would lead it out to believe.
Hmm.
We're starting to see businesses cut back. Unemployment rates are starting to trickle up, at least as far as what they're tracking now.
Yep.
Um, I think people are being more cautious about where they're spending their money, which again is typically a sign that recessionary triggers are coming into play because people are spending less on maybe going out to eat. I didn't pull up the article here, but we had one of a group that holds a number of fast food chains in the area shut down their entire operation in Wisconsin,
Yeah.
all their stores. Now, I think it's a PE, so they have private equity companies, so they have holdings elsewhere, but they closed 5 locations in Wisconsin because they really didn't say, but it sounds like they were underperforming.
Right.
Now, that could be a number of things. It could be quality of food, it could be quality of service, could be getting enough help, whatever you want to call it. But all those things kind of come into play because typically, if we see quality of product or quality of service go down, a lot of times that also is a sign of inflationary tactics because we're doing everything we can to cut costs to increase profits.
Hmm. The I think you're going to see a lot more of that because there is the jump in prices is problem number one. The extended interest rates is problem number two. Because interest rates translate to your cost of capital. How
Right.
much did it cost you to actually have the dollar that you had in your pocket? And if as those prices stay high, that's when people start to realize that you know the reaction time is slow. At
Mm-hmm.
first you think, well, everything's fine. I have a whole bunch of extra cash. I'm good to go. I'm not going to worry about it. It's a short-term effect. As the short term turns to long term, people start to realize that that money that was in my pocket, there's less,
Mm-hmm.
and everybody realizes it a little bit at a different time. So as those people realize that I don't have as much cash, whether it's a business owner, personal, everything is the same, right?
Right.
It's run by people, so the reaction time is different depending on the person. But a business now is starting to see I can't spend that money like I could last month or last year. So now I have to start to scale back because this is no longer a short-term problem. This is new normal. This is
Right.
my new quote for the podcast.
The
New
new
normal.
normal.
And the thing is, I really don't like new normal. It's not a term that I like or not a phrase that I like. So, but unfortunately, I think that's where we're at. I think this is a little bit of the new normal, and everybody has to start thinking slightly differently, if not significantly differently. Um, because your plans may not be good. They may not work anymore. The plan you thought you would have first quarter of this year may not look the same in third or fourth quarter this year going into 2025.
So with that, from a financial perspective, I'll just kind of ask you this question. We're going into the fall of again an election year. We know election years, many businesses get a little skittish and they kind of pull back because they want to see what candidate they're going to have to deal with after November, and then they start making decisions on it. Um, I mean, what should they be looking at financially now to prepare for whatever's coming in the future? Because as you pointed out, every business is different. I believe all businesses have a lag time. So things might be really good today, but a year from now, 2 years from now, it might be a different story. And that to me just hints at construction, because it seems like construction is always about 2 years out. So they're starting to feeling a leveling off now.
Mm-hmm.
What could happen 2 years from now is a completely different story. But they're looking at going, well, my sales are up, my profits are up, I still have work to do. But that work's typically already been in the books, already been financed, which is why you have it. You take a grocery store, though, the things that are more commonly associated with the consumer and whatnot, and that's of course been on the mark with the current administration. You need food today. You don't need food 2 years from now. You're going to the store because you're going to buy something you're probably going to consume within the next 5 to 7 days. And as a business, how do we have to look at that stuff?
Especially on an example like that, I think if you're 2 years in advance, sort of looking ahead, I'm a conservative guy, so I would actually go back and increase it. I would I would increase the idea of how much cash you should have on hand.
Yep.
And I would do that early, whether that's a month. You know your business better than I do, and I'm not going to pontificate from here, how much you should add. But I think you should definitely consider that, there's going to be a hit somewhere in your business. You're going to come up short somewhere in your business. So plan now for it and increase a bit. Say if I normally have to have a couple of months of cash on hand, add a month or two and see if you can make that work with the same numbers that you're kind of figuring. Number
Yep.
two, assume that all of these, promises of we're going to take care of inflation. I don't know about that.
Well,
I'll
in
tell
some
you,
ways, we hope they don't actually do it, because it's not going to make things better. It's going to make things worse.
yeah. I mean, how are you going to do that? If, as we said already in this podcast, if the labor cost, okay, is one of the factors that we're having to deal with, okay,
Mm-hmm.
how are you going to reduce the inflationary costs related to labor? You're either going to have to lay a bunch of people off, okay, or somehow, which I think is illegal, you're going to go around and tell all these people, hey, by the way, we're going back to 2020 levels on your salary,
Well, you
right?
can do that if you notify them, but
Yeah.
how many people are going to stick around if
That,
you tell them,
that
well, your pay's being cut by
Yeah,
40%?
you can't win. Like you can't
No.
win on that. So I don't understand how somebody can just say, "Well, we're going to take care of inflation and everything's going to go back to normal." Well, what's normal?
Well,
Yeah.
here's another part to that labor cost, Rich.
Mhm.
They're polling on actually raising the minimum wage, and they want to move it to $15 an hour or $20 an hour, wherever it's going to be. Well, if you do that, you're actually enhancing the inflation, because if everyone makes more money, and trust me, people should be paid a fair wage for what they do. They should be paid what their current market supports.
Mhm.
Not all jobs are lifetime jobs. We can go around and round and round about that, but the bottom line is, if you raise the bar to where now everyone's making $15 to $20 an hour, that money, yes, they make more money, but then it forces the cost of rent, food, everything else then goes up, because there's more people able to purchase at the current levels, which then creates shortages, which then,
Mhm.
according to economists, pushes the price up, because you got to meet that balance where price and quantity align.
Yeah. And the thing is too, it ties back into conversations that we've had in the past. We talked about, minimum wage when minimum wage was going to come in and all these businesses turned around and said, "Well, okay, that sounds great. Thank you very much." and then they turned around and they automated or
Hmm.
they made other changes so that instead of hiring 20 people this year, they hired 10.
Yes.
Okay. So those other 10 people are out looking for a job. So suddenly unemployment starts going up. And who's paying for those people? Benefits come from the government that, oh, if you're unemployed, we'll cover you for X dollars. So one way or the other, there's dollars going out,
Right.
right? And it's taxpayer money that's going out. So, okay, so everything gets to be a little bit more expensive. And then you add on the fact that now taxes are going to wind up going up. Somewhere along the line, they're already talking about it. That's somewhere along the line, we're going to have to pay more taxes. Okay. Or
Yep.
fees. Okay. They'll sneak one in on you and all the fees will go up. And say, oh, yeah. We didn't tax you more. Oh, okay. But you feed us to death.
Yes.
So, yeah, it's just, sorry, getting on my soapbox there, but somewhere along the line, costs stay. Even if you tell me that you're going to decrease costs, taxes will go up. My cost is not going to benefit. I'm not going to gain anything by
Right.
anything that either candidate's going to do in January.
Yep. And I've got something up here on the screen, so most people aren't going to be able to see it. But this is also something we were talking about a little bit before we jumped on, so I'll let you expand on it a little bit more. But people often don't understand inflation because our government does a very poor job of explaining the impact of inflation. They say inflation's coming down. It's really not coming down per se.
No.
It just means we're adding less to it. Maybe you can explain a little bit better than I did.
I think we have to be careful when we're listening to people who say, I'm going to take care of inflation. Okay. What are you looking to take care of? Are you looking to actually take care of the fact that my cost of milk went from $2 to $4 and you're going to bring it back to $2? That's what everybody hears.
Right.
But what they're saying is the $4 is not going to go to $5 because we're going to stop the rate. We're actually going to work on the inflation rate, not the actual inflation. They're not going to put milk back to $2. I don't see it. Okay. I hope I'm wrong. Please come back to the podcast next time and you can yell at me and say I was wrong.
I hope you're right, because coming from a dairy family, I can tell you if milk goes back to $2 a gallon and all the other things being equal, we will now have a shortage of milk and cheese and ice cream and everything else that we enjoy, because it's going to be unprofitable for farmers to do the job that they do.
Yeah.
The only way you would get it back to $2 a gallon is you'd have to lower the costs of everything else to make it more affordable again. And that's the cumulative part of inflation that people don't talk about or they forget about. So I've got a graph up here, and then we look at inflation like 14, 15, it's like 0.8, 0.7%. It was really, really low. Mm-hmm. Then it jumps up to like 2.1, and then it's 1.9, 2.3, 1.4 in 2020. So, that I think, and again, correct me if I'm wrong, it seems to be the number that most economists are happy with. There's got to be some inflation, because if there's no inflation, then there's other economic problems that happen with that. If there's too much inflation, kind of the same thing. There's just not enough income to support it or money to support it. But then we see it jump up. So what we forget about is that the 0.8 adds, the 0.7 adds to the 0.8, the 2.1 adds to the 0.7, the 2.1 adds to the 2.1, the 1.9 adds to the 2.1. These numbers are building on top of each other. So when they say they're lowering inflation, they're really just slowing the rate that the inflation is increasing. That's a good thing, but it's not eliminating inflation, nor are they often able to slow it to where they want it to be.
Yeah. It's definitely the rate of inflation that they're talking about, not inflation itself.
Yep.
So, set your expectations right for when they're speaking, because they're not going to speak to you like you are trying to hear. You're trying to hear that my grocery bill is going to drop, and it's not going to drop. This is what we were talking about before. It becomes time now to start thinking about things differently than you did before. Okay. And I don't want everybody to just run out and say, well, if everybody else is going to charge more, I'm going to charge more. That's not necessarily the answer either. You really have to look at your business and understand, if I raise the prices, what's the risk? You know,
Yes.
because the risk is exactly what also you said before, that if the price is too high, and everybody wants to call it price gouging, okay, if the price is too high, there's somebody else out there who'll do it for a couple dollars less.
Right.
So, be careful. Don't just, oh, I'm just going to raise prices because everybody else did. Well, apparently there's going to be people out there who did not, and
Yeah, it's
they're going to be your new competition.
to me, from the operations side, as I'm thinking about all this, how do we battle inflation? Some of it is going to be increasing prices, but probably just as importantly is going to be getting more efficient and trying to figure out ways to mitigate certain costs. Now, in some of the industries I deal with, that could be more automation. You're putting in a robot or a machine to do the work that you might have had one or two humans do. While the cost might be higher in the short term, over time, that robot doesn't get sick. It can work 7 days a week, often can work 24 hours a day until it breaks down. You can significantly lower your output costs that way. I think it's definitely worthwhile for every business, if they go through a strategic planning process or go through some sort of review, either every couple of years, typically 2 to 3 years. You should be looking at what you're currently doing and what's inefficient about what you're doing. Map your processes out, look for those redundancies, look for areas where it slows down quality or service, and find ways to remove those issues from the pipeline. So that way, without raising your fees, you're making more money because now you're wasting less time doing things you shouldn't be doing anyway. And that's probably the easiest fixed and the most cost effective one, because you're not affecting labor and you're not bringing in new equipment. But I agree with you. I think businesses right now have to start taking a hard look at, not today, but 2, 3 years from now, and say, where am I going to be at and what condition am I going to be in? And I don't believe it has anything to do with who's going to be the next president. It really comes down to, we're kind of on a certain course right now, and whoever comes in, they can promise all they want. They're probably not going to be able to change directory too much. Unfortunately, if they are able to, it's probably not going to go the way we want it to. It's probably going to go the other way. So it's really important to look at your operation, figure out how you're going to optimize as best as possible, both financially and mechanically or operations wise.
Right. I can't disagree with you on that one. I think that it's one of those things that you really do have to sit down, look at your business, break it down, as you said, into processes, and probably at this point, if you've never had the need to do a budget, a forecast, a written plan that you can look
Mm-hmm.
back at, if you haven't done that before, do it now.
Yeah.
I've seen a lot of people that have gotten 100% successful results because they know their business really well and they can follow the same path and it'll just keep going. But I think there's enough sort of red flags going on right now to say, I think you don't want to find out the day that your plan misses, because it's going to be a big
Yes.
miss. It's not going to be a small miss, it's going to be a big miss.
It still surprises me the number of businesses who don't know their numbers, don't read the P&Ls, don't look at the balance sheet, don't pay attention to what's in the bank account. Going back to your, I have this barrel of money. As long as there's
Yeah.
money in the barrel, I make profit. Well,
Yeah.
we both know, and I think there's a lot of people out there that realize that that's not an accurate way to measure your success.
Yeah.
And as inflation creeps up, and as the lawmakers change laws that could affect business, you got to be prepared for those things. So, Rich, if they need to get a hold of somebody, maybe to help them with a plan or at least help them understand their numbers, who do they contact?
Contact me. My best contact info is my email address, rveltri@veltrigroup.com.
Excellent. And if you need to get a hold of me for operations, or need to get a hold of both of us for that matter, you can reach me at danpaulsonletsgo.com. There is a form there you can fill out, and I'll be happy to reach back out to you, and we can set up a meeting to see how we can help you get things back in line. So, Rich, As always, vibrant conversation here. I think we solved the world's problems. Right? We should probably look at going for president and VP ourselves. Personally, no, never going to do that. But either way, it's been a good conversation, and I'm sure there will be more discussed in the coming weeks.
Absolutely.
Sounds good. All right. Take care, sir.
All right. Take care.